tell me if you can't. Thanks for coming and welcome to ICT4D. It's really great to speak with all of you. My name's Chris Watson. I work at a surprise commercial tech company called Premise Data, but I run the international development team here. And today, and on theme, I think with the conferences, I want to focus on how we make technology choices in our partnerships, and because that's such a big topic, I'm going to focus really specifically on when might a commercial product be the right one for you, and frankly, when might it be the wrong one. So to kind of set the stage on this, I think just given the nature of the conference, we all believe that technology can play a role in addressing a lot of the development challenges that our organizations and our beneficiaries are trying to face. So let's just walk through a couple of these to all kind of level set, right? How can we improve health worker decision making? How can we increase farmers' access to market data? How can we improve the way that public health officials or maybe other parts of the government, make strategic decisions? And, how can we monitor the impact of our programs, right? Like all, I think, kind of low-hanging fruit, problems that we can help solve with technology. And so when we go about picking technologies or designing them to address these problems, everything starts in my mind with one decision. And many times I think this is a decision that we make kind of subconsciously, or that we at least don't explicitly state our rationale. And that decision is, should we build something that can solve this problem? Or should we either buy or maybe adopt an existing product that can solve it? So let's revisit these four, sort of challenges that I laid out and reframe those as a technology choice, as a way to set the stage. So should we build a health worker decision support tool, or should we just maybe modify or configure an existing one that's out there already? Should we build an app that can provide market prices to farmers? Or maybe there's a commercial company out there doing that already that we should be trying to promote. Should we build a custom database and a set of dashboards that's meant to help, increase government's decision making? Or should we be building the capacity of their staff to use a Power BI or a Tableau or a Google Data Studio and some other, commercial cloud solutions? Should we build a project database for our program? Or should we try to use a software as a service-based M&E tool, right? So, as we go about making these decisions, I believe, and this is maybe the part where I'm going to be a little provocative, that our industry has a set of norms and biases that greatly impact these choices, and we don't think about them enough. So, the first is, and this is definitely more on donors than it is implementing partners, but it's just easier for a donor to give money to an NGO or a university than a for-profit company. And that is especially true if that is a product company with kind of a different business model than something that's project-based. We also often, I think sometimes to our detriment, believe that the problems that are faced by the governments that we're working with or by the citizens of low and middle income countries, that those problems are different than those that are faced by high income countries. And then I think in a similar vein, we often assume that the capacity of staff working at those governments or of our beneficiaries, or maybe our own organization staff, is lower when it comes to using technology than in high income countries. And so, I think on top of those norms, we also have a set of kind of assumptions about commercial products that have kind of led us to kind of lean towards building our own things a lot of the time. The first is a lot of these products have got, either a subscription business model or they've got something with an ongoing fee. And the belief is that that is never going to work. It is inherently not sustainable. Second is that, if that product is built by a company whose main kind of business or reason for being isn't international development, then they don't understand the challenges that we're trying to address. And as such, their products are not going to make sense. Honestly, I would say that is true more often than not, but it is not true 100% of the time in the way that I think we sometimes assume it is. And then lastly, I think there's an assumption in the industry that if the product doesn't have an open source code base, it's bad. So, in my mind, like everything is a trade-off here. And what we haven't talked enough about is like, what are some of the downsides to building your own product or solution? And then how would we weigh that against the attributes of commercial products? So what are some of these downsides that I don't think we get enough discussion? So, first, anytime we want to custom build a product or solution, there's going to be a significant upfront development cost, and that cost has to usually get absorbed by donors in the community. Two, custom built products are often going to have a smaller set of user bases because we're kind of building this for one set of people who we see as having like a very specific problem. And the challenge with that is it becomes hard to have a lot of product developers involved. And then the ones that are working on that, because they have a smaller user base, are going to have less data and experience and qualitative research to go on when it comes to building that product. And that can sometimes, lead to things that I think are a little inferior. I also think that when you go about custom building a product, that means you've got to identify, oftentimes a separate solution for the ongoing maintenance of that product, for training new users, et cetera. I was just having dinner with a friend on Sunday that's working on a project that is implementing a health worker decision support tool in 5 countries. And then they're doing a randomized control trial to evaluate how much that decision support tool has impacted the health workers' abilities to do their jobs. And the issue that they're running into now as they're towards the end of the project is that product is built by a university through a grant, and that university doesn't really want to own the ongoing maintenance and support and training, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge that can be addressed, as I think we've seen in the case of DHIS2, but that's not always been the case. And then kind of revisiting sort of my earlier point, we also have a set of norms that too often aren't really given a voice that make us lean towards using or building, our own custom solution. And some of these are a little boring, but they have a major impact on what we do. So the first is like building a product is usually funded as a one-off project because that's just how international development does things. So it's like we're going to have a project whose job is to build this and then implement it, and then we're going to evaluate whether implementing that move the needle on whatever the problem is we were trying to solve. And the issue there is for those of us working in the commercial tech industry is that like most people don't build products that way. Most people, especially in software, use what's called a continuous delivery model, where you build a minimum viable product of something, get it in the hands of users, observe how they do it, both quantitatively and qualitatively, and then release new features from there. And that continuous delivery model usually doesn't have an end date. And that type of an approach doesn't square very well with the project-based model for doing things that we see, in the international development industry in a lot of places. The second, and I touched on this earlier, but because it's easier to give money to an NGO or a university if you're a donor, that is oftentimes how many of these products get built. But those organizations aren't, at their core, product organizations. And this is something that for me, having spent a little over a decade working for NGOs and then moving to Premise, I've really seen, because when I come to Premise, I see 50% of the staff working here are software developers or data scientists or product managers. And I never worked at a place that was employed people, at that many at least, with that type of a background. On top of this, this sort of like what rules that we as a community have developed around how we procure things doesn't work very well with what commercial businesses want to see, right? And so because so much of what we do is like cost plus, fixed fee or a grant that is then reimbursed on a cost basis, we just end up funding labor. And then we use labor to build things. And that doesn't work very well if you have a business model that is subscription based, or that frankly, where the owner of the product doesn't want to reveal what their margins are. So that also kind of causes us to implicitly lean towards custom built products instead of commercial ones. And I kind of got into my last point here a little bit by accident, but even the regulations sometimes make it very difficult for a donor to even buy something, or for an implementing partner to buy something that's commercial. We've kind of figured this out with leases, right? Like, nobody asks you to custom build your office. You're allowed to sign the landlord's lease without using your own paperwork. But then once we start to talk about other products, that becomes way harder. So, what are some of the reasons that we might want to consider a commercial product for our partnerships? What are some of the advantages they have? And then I'm going to walk through an example. So, first, the cost of building that product, the bigger the market is for it, the more likely it is that you can get somebody else to pay for the creation of it. And that's usually going to be an investor. So if the product solves a problem that's common for a lot of people, they can go into the market and raise money, and no donor has to pay for it. Two, these commercial products are typically going to get into what I would call sort of like a virtuous cycle of feature development, right? So they say, okay, there's a large market for a lot of people who have the problem we're trying to solve. Because of that, we can raise money, we can hire more developers. We are going to then be able to get more customers on our product because it's a larger market for it. The way they use that product then informs what we build. We then build more features, which helps us get more customers, and you go on and on and on. And so, products with larger markets get into virtual product development cycles and improvement cycles. There's also, I think, inherently less financial risk. Like, a commercial product is typically going to be geared to make it really easy to buy, and also typically it's going to be easy to quit, right? If you buy a subscription to something, the rules on all of those products are usually you can quit whenever you want, or whatever the billing cycle is, right? Monthly or annually. And so there's an opportunity to kind of try something out, see if it works, and then quit it if it doesn't. And the sunk costs associated with building custom products make it very hard to leave, right? Like, if you pour, $2 million into a project to build a tech solution, get everybody on it, find from the evaluation that it's not making that big of an impact, there is a sort of like mental block in trying to quit that because of the money that was spent to build it, that you don't quite get with commercial products. And then lastly, commercial products, especially ones that are used by a lot of people, tend to develop communities around them. And that means that, if I'm trying to figure out how to integrate Slack with Salesforce, I can Google that and I can find a Wikipedia page or some sort of user community post on exactly how to do that. I also could probably find a ton of different certified Salesforce administrators that I could pay to then go and help me figure that out or help me configure it the way I want. And it's hard to get those communities developed around custom built products that are for kind of like a narrow problem set. So let me talk about an example here that this happened to me personally, and I found it really interesting. So when the pandemic started, the US government took on responsibility for immunizing a bunch of government employees against COVID, including diplomats. And my wife is a diplomat. So, what the government saw was that diplomats are typically moving around the place a lot. And so they needed a solution to be able to monitor immunizations at the employee level, regardless of where they got immunized, right? So both my wife and I were immunized by the US Embassy in London, but then we both got our first 2 doses, but we got our 3rd dose back in Washington, DC. They need a solution to track that. And so, they said, right, this needs to be an electronic solution. There's clearly a role for technology here. It just needs to work regardless of where people go. And so what the US government did was they decided to just buy Salesforce Vaccine Cloud, which is a Salesforce product. And they did that instead of building a custom solution. Now, the government, I think, needed a few additional features to make it work well for the federal government. And it's a solution that has typically been geared towards state governments. But, the US government is a big buyer here. So they're able to ask for those things. And for those of us that are American, you can kind of compare that to how healthcare.gov was built, which is a custom built solution that took quite a long time to put together. And so the reason I bring this up is I actually see a real similarity in the requirements for electronic immunization registries in low and middle income countries, right? If you think about kind of the defining characteristic of our diplomats, it's they move around a lot. Well, that's true for a nomadic or pastoralist population that needs to, move livestock from place to place over the course of the year. It's true for families for whom a big portion of their livelihood strategy is seasonal labor. Like, what if they need to move around within a country for a certain period of time each year, and their children require routine immunizations or ultimately in different places in the country? It's also true due to shocks or conflict that cause some sort of internal migration. And so, despite those similarities, there are multiple custom-built electronic immunization registries that are being used across low and middle income countries today. And I'm not here to tell you that Salesforce Vaccine Cloud would have been a better solution. Frankly, I kind of suspect that the lack of an offline mode, it might be hard to get Salesforce to build that for you, that there might be some reasons that it's not. But I am here to say it should be considered before any of those were built. And I suspect that those evaluations are not always happening. So what are some of the reasons when it might make sense to consider, a commercial product in a kind of general way that is a framework that I think you can apply to the different problems you're trying to solve? So the first is the problem you're trying to solve shared by a lot of organizations or companies? Because if it is, that means there is a market for solving that problem, and a commercial product might exist already. I also think you should look at whether the problem you're trying to solve is likely to change a lot over time. Because if so, working with a product that's built by a company that's got a continuous delivery model might be better than custom building something and then having to move to a new custom built solution 5 years later because there wasn't an ongoing, sort of like support base of developers for that. If you do decide to build a product, I think one of the questions you should ask yourself is who's going to be responsible for that maintenance and feature upgrades? Because commercial products, they are going to charge you typically for it, but they are going to have that problem solved. And if you're, paying to build it that yourself, it might honestly be cheaper to use a commercial product than to try to figure out a solution for the ongoing support of it. And then lastly, this is a small one, but I spent a lot of my career working in emergency and conflict affected situations. But how quickly do you need the solution to be deployed? Because commercial solutions are almost always going to be faster than trying to custom build one in a situation like that. And then the last one, when is it very unlikely that a commercial product is going to be the right solution? And for me, I have 2 points here, but ultimately this all boils down to this point. Do the users of your proposed solution have a job or a workflow as part of their job that's very unique to them or to their organization? Because if so, a custom built solution is probably going to be the right approach. And I know I used, health worker decision support tools as an example of like some of these solutions where there can be some challenges with ongoing support and maintenance and feature upgrades. But ultimately, when we look at the sort of like education that most health workers in low and middle income countries receive compared to those in high income countries, their job does end up looking very different and their needs are different. And honestly, I think custom built decision support tools are probably the right way to go for those. A secondary one is, maybe you're trying to address a problem that there is a commercial product in that category, but you really should look at what types of customers that the company or the developer that's built it caters to. Because if those companies cater to enterprise customers, as opposed to like small companies or small organizations, I find it pretty unlikely that they're going to have a pricing model that makes sense from a sustainability perspective for, say, like a low and middle income government to afford. And so, you'll find, I think, that a lot of companies focus on the enterprise, or they focused on small and medium businesses, and those ones that focus on the latter typically, I think, work a little bit better in low and middle income countries. So I appreciate your time today. I just want to end with just a little bit of contact information. I know this is kind of a nerdy and a wonky topic, but I'm happy to talk about it as much as anyone. Oops, I don't know how I did that. As much as anyone wants. Oh, I clicked on my own email address. There we go. So you can get in touch with me at cwatson@premise.com. Also, I didn't really talk about Premise, but we're a company focused on making data collection in the field easy and cheap and a pleasure to do. So premise.com if you want to learn more. I'm also personally involved, and so is Premise, in an organization called Unlock Aid. It's www.unlockaid.org. We're a coalition of organizations that's trying to make aid agencies more results-oriented and innovative. So good topic, I think, for this crowd, and transparent. We're definitely looking for new members. Right now, if any of you out there are researchers, we have an RFP to try to look at how some organizations have kind of co-opted, I think, the tools and the programs that were meant to benefit local organizations. We very strongly believe that more money needs to go to local organizations. We're looking for some help studying this. We've also got comments on USAID's new localization strategy out now. And if you look at our website and it's something you would agree with, we'd appreciate you sharing it. And then lastly,